Hi there, this is James, and I'm excited to be presenting about WordPress and generative AI. So this presentation is going to talk a bit about how generative AI works, and then how this can be applied to WordPress in the form of products, use cases, things like that. Hopefully you'll have a couple of takeaways at the end of the presentation that you can use to better your own WordPress professional life and workflow. A little bit about me. My name's James. As mentioned, I am the founder of CodeWP. CodeWP is an AI platform for WordPress. We got founded in November 2022, so it's almost been a year at this point, really heads first into AI research specific for WordPress. CodeWP offers a platform for creators that includes code generation, a chatbot just like ChatGPT, but specific for WordPress and more accurate than generalist models, as well as troubleshooting and security features using AI coming soon. So if you'd like to check it out, it's at codewp.ai. But by being involved in this company, I've really been heads first into AI research in WordPress, and hopefully some of the takeaways that I've gathered from this past year of building CodeWP can help you out and will be mentioned in this presentation. I've actually been involved in WordPress specifically for 8 to 9 years, let's say. I got my start when I was a younger kid building WordPress websites for local small businesses. I sharpened my skills, learned how to code, eventually formed an agency called Isotropic. Isotropic began building websites for large public companies, big D2C shops using WooCommerce, things of that nature. So I've been involved in WordPress on kind of the freelancer side, but also the agency and large project side as well. When I was in university, I studied AI, and this was about the time where there was a lot of research coming out that enabled a lot of the generative AI that we see today. So CodeWP is really a mix of my two passions of AI and WordPress, and I get to build the company. It's pretty fun, and there's been a lot of learning and information I've gathered along the way. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the chat for this presentation, and I'll be happy to answer them. If you have any questions after this presentation, feel free to contact me on Twitter/X at James W. LePage. I also tweet a bunch about WordPress and AI. With that out of the way, let's jump right into the presentation. First, I want to talk about a quick history of AI. Then we'll talk about how the AI that we see and use today actually works. And then from there, we'll bring it into WordPress and talk about use cases, products, things like that. So, a quick history. Basically, there's a pre-2017 history and a post-2017 history. Pre-2017, we see AlexNet, GANs, AlphaGo, residual nets, all of those things on that side. And they're fairly impressive, but they're nothing really crazy. They're nothing that strikes awe and wonderment into the heart of the public. Once 2017 rolls around, the transformer architecture is released by Google. This is a research paper that identifies a new way to train and manage and run large language models to output really high quality content while not sacrificing a ton of compute or processing power to run these models. From this research comes ChatGPT, but before ChatGPT comes GPT-1 and BERT, GPT-2, and then GPT-3. Then you see that kind of progression across the years, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. And all of these different models are revising on the previous learnings of the previous model, getting better and more accurate, quicker to output. And we eventually end up in 2022, November 2022, with ChatGPT based on a special version of GPT-3. All of this research is based on the transformer architecture. Transformer architecture unlocks the GPT models, which unlocks ChatGPT, which unlocks GPT-4. It also unlocks image generation tools like Stable Diffusion and Midjourney. So pre and post 2017, landscape is a bit different. In 2023, we see the real blossoming of AI tools and technologies, a ton of tools specific for WordPress, but also specific for anything you want, integrating AI into previous workflows that didn't have AI integrated. You see that with a lot of new products coming out today, a lot of incumbent products adding AI to their tools, and just general improvements in the text generation and image generation models that run pretty much everything here. So that's a quick history, and the main takeaway is 2017. Everything changes with that transformer architecture paper. Now let's jump into how this works. So when I'm talking about AI and the models and things that underpin them, you can think about it as the ChatGPT kind of approach, where you take content, you take a prompt, and you put it into a model. This model then outputs a whole bunch of text or images or an essay or code or something like that. That model is called a LLM, and we're going to cover it from the lens of text generation. LLMs are large language models. So as the name suggests, they are for language and they're very large. And for the rest of this presentation, we're really primarily going to be covering the content generation aspect of these generative AI tools. There's also, as I mentioned before, image generation through stable diffusion and Midjourney, but just for the sake of time, I'm not really going to cover that. So LLMs are really what we're talking about here, and these are the underlying models of pretty much all generative AI tools in 2023. LLMs are kind of at the intersection of multiple disciplines within artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is a big generic term for a lot of different things. So you can see within AI comes machine learning, natural language processing, and deep learning. And then at the intersection of all of this comes the large language model. And again, the large language model, it's the thing that takes language in and outputs language out. And that's a really simple explanation of how it works. But let's talk about how they create these models that you see and use today. So when we think of a large language model, we think of something like ChatGPT, maybe Jasper for writing essays, maybe GitHub Copilot for writing code, CodeWP for WordPress specific stuff. It's really taking a bunch of inputs and getting a much better output from these inputs. So what I mean by that is if I want an essay about a cat, I'm going to go to this large language model and I'm going to say, hey, write me an essay about a cat. The large language model will then do its thing, and out will come a very detailed essay about a cat. And the question is, how does it go from my question of, hey, can you write me an essay about a cat, to this multi-paragraph, well-written essay about the cat? What's going on under the hood to get me from point A to point B? And to understand how this thing works, we need to step back and think about, how are these models actually made? How do we get something like the tools that we have today to take text in and output text? How does it work? And the way large language models work is somebody goes and gathers a ton of data. And by a ton of data, I mean hundreds of thousands of gigabytes of words, books, code, Stack Overflow, a whole bunch of data from the internet, kind of all written information. All of this data is then taken and run through training. We use this data in training to train a large language model on the different complexities of human language. So if we have all of these hundreds of thousands of gigabytes of information and we push it through a training run to get to our fine-tuned model, when this training run is occurring, the model is kind of learning how a human being would write content in any given situation. Every time this model figures something out, it creates a parameter. And the more parameters a large language model has, the more accurate it's going to be on general topics and information and logic. So we take all this information, we run it through the training run produces parameters and weights and biases, and then from that, we get a very large language model that kind of has this information from all of its training data baked into the model, and then that information can then be essentially recalled when somebody enters the prompt. So as somebody enters the prompt, the information from the training is recalled, and that information is then used to generate an output. The large language model is actually very similar to a statistical machine. Essentially, when you're training this model on all of this information and content about the world and about code and WordPress and essay writing and cats and dogs and all of these different things, it's discovering the statistical relevance of words coming after other words. So it reads all this information and it says, oh, I've seen something like this in the past. I've seen something like the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. I've seen this in the past. So statistically, when I see this grouping of words, I'm going to output the word dog. And after this grouping of words, the lazy dog, I can maybe then output the comma and then output additional information that is statistically relevant given the words that have been inputted into me. So the large language model is very similar to a statistical machine in that sense. Each parameter, each weight and bias is going to determine how the large language model takes the input chunk of words, processes it, and then outputs information based on all of the parameters and weights and biases within that it had learned during the training run. So all of that to say, a large language model understands the world based on the training data it has been given. It's a statistical model that takes the input of words and then predicts the most probable output from that. So based on the training data, the more training data you have on a specific topic, the better it will be at outputting information about that specific topic. Something else that can help you conceptualize large language models is thinking about it as a calculator for words. Thinking about a large language model as a calculator for words is a really helpful way to kind of attach it to an existing technology that we all know and love in the calculator. A calculator takes a bunch of input numbers, and then from those input numbers, you get a whole bunch of output numbers. And in between the input and the output is the calculator. Thinking about a large language model as a calculator for words, you have a bunch of input in your prompt, your information that you're putting into this model. The calculator is the large language model, which predicts the statistical relevance and probability of additional words occurring after that prompt. And then out comes your full generation of the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, or I want an article about a cat, and then out comes your article about the cat. The calculator for words analogy is great because it shows you how it works on the surface level, but it also shows you how to get better outputs. So if I put in garbage prompts or minimal prompts, I'm going to get out not the greatest output. But if I put in a great prompt, I'm going to get a great output. What I mean by that is if I ask it to write an article about a cat, it will write an article about a cat, but it won't be really unique. It won't read great. It'll kind of just be a little generic because, again, it's predicting the most probable output based on your input. And the less words you have, the less of the probabilities it has to work with, so the more generic the output gets. But if I enter a prompt saying, write me an essay about this species of cat and what it does differently than this other species of cat, and by the way, they're based only in South Africa and they have XYZ. And I'm also going to include a whole bunch of research that I found online that I know is right, that's really accurate, and you can also use that for your generation as well. That's a really good prompt, and that calculation results in a much better output of words. So I really like that analogy from Simon Williamson. I think it's really helpful to think about LLMs as a calculator for words. So these LLMs, they consistently get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they also consistently get better and better and better. And as I mentioned before, training data really impacts the output of these models. And in the diagram to the left, you can see the blessings of scale. And this is talking about the compute power required to train these models, but it's really very linearly associated with the parameters and size of the models as well. And you can see that the compute and size of these models is just on an upwards trend going up and up and up year after year. And we see GPT-2, then we see GPT-3, then we see Lambda and Palm and things like that. They just get bigger and bigger. And as they get bigger and bigger, the generalist models get better at more things. They're also quick learners, as you can see in the right graph. As the parameters increase, they also get closer and closer and actually begin to exceed the benchmark for some human performance. So for example, we can look at reading comprehension tests, we can look at language understanding tests, and you can see that it's been going up and up and up as the models increase and go up and up and up, and they're actually exceeding human performance at this point. And benchmarks aren't great. They're not the most realistic, but they are great for comparing models to models. They're not great for comparing models to humans. Models will never have that creativity or human element that we do. There's real impact as these models get better, as the training data gets more quality, as the training data gets bigger, as the large language models grow in parameter size. There's real impact. And as these models get better, there's financial impact on many industries, but specifically industries that are related to us in WordPress. We can see that these blue dots represent 75% of the total annual impact on generative AI in terms of billions of dollars as a percentage of functional spend. All that to say that the industries that are being impacted the most are software engineering, customer operations, marketing, sales, product and R&D. And this is pretty much everything that a WordPress creator touches. So I'm going to be doing a bit of marketing when building a site. I'm definitely going to be doing software engineering, customer operations, things like that. Our industry is really primed to be impacted by AI. And that might not necessarily be a bad thing because, I'll talk about that in a bit, but because it gives us, the creators, the tools that we need to make websites better and more effectively for our clients. Clients won't be using the tools themselves. I believe that we'll be using the tools to make our lives easier and make better products for the final end users. Do we panic? Do we worry about this big impact? And I say no. And I think a lot of other people kind of have been coming to the same conclusion of, if we want to replace programmers with AI, and you can replace programmers with, if we want to replace WordPress creators, if we want to replace marketers with AI, clients will accurately need to describe what they want. We're safe, right? And I really think that this is accurate when it comes to AI because clients hire us to build websites, to build experiences, to make their lives easier. And we use tools maybe like page builders, which have replaced the need to write a complete theme in the past. We're using these tools to make our lives easier as builders, but the clients themselves aren't really using these tools. And when they do use these tools, they typically end up in a situation where they're so lost and so upset that they come and pay us extra to go and fix their mistakes. So I don't say we panic, and I say that our jobs are pretty safe, and AI gives WordPress creators the tools that they need to be more effective and efficient, as opposed to arming the client to do what we previously could do. So I'm not too worried there. With all that said, let's jump into the WordPress side of things. So now we have a general understanding of how AI works, specifically large language models, which underpin pretty much all the products that are text-based. And by text-based, I don't just mean essay generation, but I can also refer to code generator tools. I can refer to helpful troubleshooters, bots, things like that. Anything that uses language kind of on the back end, that's what I'm referring to. So now that we know how the large language models work that underpin many of these products and how kind of to prompt them, the calculator for words analogy, the input, the output, the statistical probability. Essentially, the large language model is that statistical machine. Now that we know how this works, let's take a look at some WordPress products that use this technology and some use cases that you can take home and begin experimenting with on your own. And you can see in the background of this slide, there are a whole bunch of different products. You can see a content poster on one. You can see a coding tool on the other. Maybe a SEO tool here and there, and we'll talk about a few specifically in a bit. Here you can also see a list of a lot more AI tools, and this is just to show you that in WordPress only, WordPress specifically, there's been a ton of work, a ton of progress, a ton of products coming out day after day that really add value to our ecosystem. And reading through some of these things, we see AI assistants, we see products that previously had not had AI that now have AI, and Elementor. We see James LePage's CodeWP here. We also see content generators. We see image generators. We see classification tools, SEO tools, just a huge list that is never ending and always growing. So a great resource to figure out some tools in WordPress would be wpaiuniverse.com. And then also there's an AI for that.com, which is like the big repository of all AI tools based on the generative AI boom that I talked about in that timeline slide. you can use these tools to figure out the best and most recent releases of AI tools for WordPress, but also for other industries. So now I want to highlight a couple of products before jumping into use cases that I think do AI really well and do it well in a production environment. What I mean by that is it's not something that's kind of hacked together. It's something that works really well. So the first example here is Jetpack. Jetpack was one of the first major companies or offerings to bring AI to WordPress in their AI assistant. And this is baked right into the core of WordPress as a Gutenberg block. The AI assistant, you can type in, hey, I want content about X, Y, and Z. It will write that content, and then you can accept the generation, which is then inputted into Gutenberg as individual blocks. And I think that's a really good representation of a product that already exists, that's built AI into its core offering, but also has built AI into WordPress using native features and functions. So as a Gutenberg block, it's very well integrated, very well built, and it saves a lot of people time. If you really need to write some quick thing about maybe a product description or a very short informational article for placeholder content, this could save you a bunch of time. And it's a great, well-integrated, well-built piece of kit. For the second product, I wanted to mention CodeWP, which is the tool that I founded and have been working on for the past year. We are currently live with a code generation tool, but we're soon to be launching a complete platform that offers code, chat, security, and troubleshooting. And this is a great representation of what happens when you niche down into a specific industry and topic. So we went out and decided to build an AI tool specific to WordPress. And by focusing on WordPress, we're able to take existing models and train our own models on WordPress code and information and different documentation, things like that, that's up to date and really accurate. Our platform then can generate code for WordPress, generate answers about WordPress that are much more accurate than generalist models like ChatGPT and other things like that. It's also a product that's built specifically for our platform. It connects to our platform to create more custom generations, allow you for conversational troubleshooting, things like that. And it works very well with WordPress because it's built for WordPress. So it's a good example of what happens when you're able to focus on a specific industry and build for that industry. So I hope you check it out, CodeWP.ai. And the third product feature highlight that I really wanted to bring up is ChatGPT. And I'm sure most people are familiar with this product, but it's a conversational interface to the most up-to-date, most powerful models that are available to the public from OpenAI. And ChatGPT gives you that conversational interface on top of the GPT-4 model and GPT 3.5 Turbo model. As I mentioned before, it's a generalist tool, so it can do everything well, but it can't do specific things incredibly. But with that said, it's really helpful for WordPress, and I'm going to dive into a couple use cases later on in this presentation that you can take home with you. So with that said, let's jump into the use cases. And I'm going to talk about 3 different groups that can use AI for specific things. The first group being creators. And a creator is anybody who's creating a WordPress website. And you can be creating a WordPress website by coding it yourself. But in this section, I'm really going to be talking towards those who are building with page builders, maybe writing a small plugin or a couple snippets here and there, but really kind of working in that no-code landscape for WordPress. So for creators, there are a couple cases. The first case is building better conversationally. And this is a general case that kind of looks at ChatGPT and the CodeWP chat feature and says, how can we use this newfound technology to make our lives easier? And building better conversationally can take the form of many different things. You can write small code snippets to enhance the functionality of a website, but you can also ask it to write hyper-specific placeholder text based on the information about a company that you give it. You can ask it to create color palettes and ideate on the structure of landing pages. There are many different things that you can do, but you can treat it like it is some assistant, some helpful person who's very well versed in WordPress that you can bounce ideas off of or use to create these various starting points that then your human creativity can take over and go and build and iterate on yourself. So build better conversationally. I think this is a great use case for AI. Troubleshooting better. So for me, whenever I was building WordPress websites, especially by myself with no team to support me, I would always bump into the white screen of death or some issue that was very hard to solve. Luckily, WordPress does come with error logs and these helpful features, the WP debug. But even then, sometimes it's really complicated and honestly like scary to navigate through. And conversational AI like ChatGPT is really helpful when it comes to troubleshooting. You can copy and paste the error message. You can say, I'm using these plugins, I'm using this version of WordPress, and it will most likely help you point towards a specific thing to look into and research further to help you figure out your issue. So troubleshooting is really beneficial, and I find that it's helpful. You can see in this description below, I say, help, my site's giving me a fatal error. Here it is. And it gives me all of these steps to go and try and figure out how to fix it. And this was actually a real issue that I bumped into. So very helpful. It's almost like another junior developer that you can bounce ideas off of when troubleshooting a site. The third case is be more efficient. And by be more efficient, I mean use the AI tools that other plugins have integrated into their own product to be more efficient. Like Elementor, they've added custom image generation. They've added custom coding, custom content within their editor. And you can very easily now create images and create content with the click of a button and just be more efficient. You can also, on all-in-one SEO, create post titles and post excerpts for the meta description and meta title on Google using AI. And this could be helpful if you're writing a blog at scale. I already mentioned Jetpack Assistant, and there are probably dozens of other examples of really well-established, well-used WordPress plugins that are now just adding these little snippets of AI here and there to make their products better and easier for the end user. So be more efficient, find the tools that use AI and start using them yourself. Do things quicker, do things easier, make your life much better. All right, for developers, and this is kind of my bread and butter. This is what we launched CodeWP for originally before kind of opening it up to pretty much anybody who builds a WordPress website. I'm also a WordPress developer. I've done this for many years. So there are a lot of tools that can make our lives a lot easier. And by the developer, I mean somebody who's writing plugins, writing themes, coding more than dragging and dropping. So developer case number one, research and code better. So specifically with ChatGPT, I don't really use it to write any code because there are a lot of hallucinations. There are a lot of situations where it will write code that doesn't actually exist but looks correct. And when installed, it creates a fatal error on the site, something like that. So instead, what I use it for is research and code improvements. So if I have code that I've already written and I want to see if it could be written better or if there's some other way to do things, maybe it's functional and it should be rewritten as object-oriented, things like that, I can work with ChatGPT or CodeWP to conversationally figure out if I can improve my code. Another case is research. I really like the case of research with AI, specifically when using AI for plugins trained on code bases, trained on documentation like CodeWP, but ChatGPT is also really helpful. When you say, hey, I'm looking for a function that does XYZ in this plugin, does it exist? Hey, I'm looking for a methodology to go and do XYZ in this plugin. What's the methodology? And typically it will come back with some information that, of course, you need to fact check, given that the documentation is about 2 years out of date. This was trained in 2021. If plugins have been actively developed since then, there are going to be some changes. But for me, as a developer who knows what he's doing, it's really helpful to get a starting point of, hey, maybe this filter exists. I should go check the code base and see if it does. Or maybe this method exists. Let me go figure out if the documentation is up to date and tells me about it. So really helpful when it comes to research. When I'm actually developing plugins and themes, there are now many helpful tools in my IDE to code better. So GitHub Copilot is probably the one that many people are familiar with. It helps you write code as like a hyper-powered autocomplete. I can write the beginning of a function and it will complete it for me. Most cases is correct, very helpful. There are other tools like SourceGraph Cody, which is in this screenshot here, where I can chat with my entire code base. So I can ask, what does this specific function do? And this is the get field function for ACF. I ask, what does this do? And it draws on multiple files to answer the question. There are also offerings by Amazon, and of course, CodeWP has a VS Code extension as well. And then there are also complete IDEs that are AI native. So the first big image here is a tool called cursor.so. It looks a little bit like VS Code because it's forked from it, but it's an AI native tool with chat generation, things like that built right into it. So really cool, really can improve the workflow, improve your development efficiency there. And CodeWP as well, the new version that we're launching, will support multiple files. You can build entire plugins with it from a single prompt. So these kind of integrated tools are really helpful for the developers among us. All right, finally, let's talk about for administrators. So for administrators, these are the people on the back end of the website who are typically like spamming comments, who are publishing posts, who are using WordPress as is intended, as a content management system, or maybe an e-commerce tool if it's WooCommerce. And these administrators may need help in terms of navigating through a website, or just might want to be more efficient with their navigation of a WordPress site. And that's kind of what I see the admin cases being, but there aren't really any tools that I'm aware of that help out here. So I think that these tools will exist very soon. I know that we're working on them internally at CodeWP, but hopefully there are other people working on them as well. And these tools can really be helpful to the millions of people who touch WordPress as kind of the end user who is the admin managing the site. So the first is Navigate Better. And by Navigate Better, what I mean here is in WordPress 6.3, the command palette was launched. I believe it's called palette, but the command palette was launched. Right now, you can kind of use shortcuts here, like add a new page. If you type in add, it will suggest add a new page. You hit enter, it adds the new page. But I can really see this being supercharged by AI, where you say add a new page about snakes, and it will add that new page about snakes. And maybe if you're using a full site editing theme, it will actually create a block-based page with information and images about snakes. So navigating better, kind of jumping between different things could be really helpful. Another case is an AI agent. So completing tasks in WordPress can sometimes be a bit confusing, especially if you're a first-time user. If you've just gotten delivered a really complicated WordPress site with dozens of plugins, it can be a bit complicated. So something that the industry has been working on in AI is something called an AI agent, which gives the capabilities of a large language model access to the internet, the ability to click buttons, the ability to view web pages, things like that. And this agent can then go and complete tasks that their human has told it to do. So in this example below, this is an AI agent created by Hyperwrite. It's really one of the only ones in production right now. I say, hey, go find all of the comments in WordPress and mark them as spam. And from that, it goes and marks it as spam. So this is an early example, but I can definitely see AI agents taking hold and beginning to make the workflow of using the admin side of WordPress a lot easier, where instead of clicking through multiple menus to figure something out, you just say, hey, I need this post to be edited. I need this API key to be added to this hidden section or settings panel for this really complicated plugin. I need this, that, or the other, and it will go and do it itself. So completing tasks could definitely be something that is at the core of the WordPress experience in a few years. All right, let's wrap up with what's coming. So the first thing on the horizon is multimodal AI, and this is AI that can ingest multiple different types of data. So we have text data, we have image data, we have video and audio data. These AI models will not only just understand text, but they can understand images and text, or audio and text, or a combination of all of it. And this is something that is pretty big, and it's going to be launching before the end of 2023. And when an AI can understand an image, say maybe a screenshot of a website, and text, maybe you ask a question about the screenshot of the site, like, is it accessible? Are there ways to improve the conversion of this design? Things like that. Once you have access to that, the AI becomes much more like a human assistant that is able to see and understand. So multimodal AI being built into products that's going to be pretty huge, and it's going to be really beneficial to those who adopt it in the beginning. Open source AI is something that's already here. We see it with Llama 2 and CodeLlama. These are models released by Meta or Facebook that are open source. You can see all of the weights. You can see all of the information. You can self-host it yourself. Open source AI really inspires other researchers to release information that may have been some technical breakthrough or something like that. And it also allows users to fine-tune cost-effective AI models to their specific use cases and make things much quicker, much easier, and much cheaper in the AI realm of things. So open source AI, there's just continued improvement there. These models are getting as good or better than ChatGPT and GPT and closed-sourced models like them. So this is something else to keep an eye on as well. The final thing I talked about in the admin section of things, but AI agents, things that you can tell to go do a task and they'll go do the task autonomously, that's something that's on the way. There are already kind of generalist models out there. At CodeWP, we're working on one specific to WordPress to help with onboarding and things like that. So an AI agent is something to keep an eye on in the general usage of AI and your overarching workflow, but also in WordPress specifically. So that's what's on the way. I hope this was a really helpful presentation, something you can walk away with value from. If you have any questions, definitely leave them for me. You can also, after this presentation, contact me on Twitter at James LePage. Feel free to send a DM or tweet at me. I'd be happy to answer them, and I hope this was a helpful presentation.